We're going to go ahead and read chapter 12 of A Long Walk to Water by Linda Sue Park. Southern Sudan, 2009. An iron giraffe. A red giraffe that made very loud noises. The giraffe was a tall drill that had been brought to the village by the two men who had visited earlier. They had returned with a crew of 10 more men and 2 trucks, one hauling the giraffe drill along with other mysterious equipment, and the other loaded with plastic pipe. Meanwhile, the land was still being cleared. So, can you imagine that? It's calling an iron giraffe. So it's not really a giraffe, but I'm pretty sure Naya's never seen anything like this before. But can you see why she would explain it as a giraffe if she's never seen a machine like this before? Naya's mother tied the baby on her back and walked with several other women to a place where between the village and the pond. They collected piles of rocks and stones and tied them up into bundles using sturdy cloth. They balanced the bundles on their heads, walked back to the drilling site, and emptied the rocks onto the ground. Other villagers, using tools borrowed from the visitors, pounded the rocks to break them up into gravel. Many loads of gravel would be needed. Naya didn't know why. The piles of gravel grew larger each day. The clangor of machinery and hammer greeted Naya each time she returned from the pond. Unfamiliar noises that mingled with the voices of men, shouting, and women singing. It was the sound of people working hard together, but it did not sound at all like water. So Naya's still making her trips to the pond twice a day while all of this work is happening. What are the villagers doing to actually help with this whole process? What is something that they're doing right now? They cleared the lands, and now what are they doing? They're collecting rocks for gravel, aren't they? So they're collecting those rocks. They're making the gravel because it said they need a lot of it. So interested to see what happens as this story of Naya continues. Etang Refugee Camp, Ethiopia, 1985. Remember, Salva saw the woman in the orange headscarf last time? Who did he think it was? His mom. Mother, mother, please. Salva opened his mouth to call out again, but the words did not come. Instead, he closed his mouth, lowered his head, and turned away. The woman in the orange headscarf was not his mother. He knew this for certain, even though she was still far away and he had not seen her face. Uncle's words came back to him. The village of Luan Erik was attacked, burned. Few people survived. No one knows where they are now. In the moment before calling out to the woman a second time, Salva realized what Uncle had truly meant. Something Salva had known in his heart for a long time. His family was gone. They had been killed by bullets or bombs, starvation or sickness. It did not matter how. What mattered was that Salva was on his own now. He felt as though he were standing on the edge of a giant hole, a hole filled with black despair of nothingness. I am alone now. I am all that is left of my family. His father, who had sent Salva to school, brought him treats like mangoes, trusted him to take care of the herd. His mother, always ready with food and milk and a soft hand to stroke Salva's head. His brothers and sisters, whom he had laughed with and played with and looked after. He would never see them again. How can I go on without them? But how can I not go on? They would want me to survive, to grow up and make something of my life, to honor their memories. What was it Uncle had said during that first terrible day in the desert? Do you see that group of bushes? You need only to walk as far as those bushes. Uncle had helped him get through the desert that way, bit by bit, one step at a time. Perhaps Salva could get through life at the camp in the same way. I need only to get through the rest of this day, he told himself. This day and no other. If someone had told Salva that he would live in the camp for 6 years, he would have never believed it. So that's some big stuff. Salva has now accepted that that he doesn't think he's going to see his family again. He's accepted in his heart that they are probably dead. And that's really scary for him. But I like it said, how can I go on without them? And then it says, but how can I not go on? They would want him to continue on. They would want him to be successful. And for that, he's going to be, isn't he? So he's got that hope. He's taken things day by day, kind of like Uncle had him walking in the desert from one place to another, just making little goals. He's thinking of that in the same way as he's moving forward. So he's in this camp for 6 years. We're going to go ahead and read on and see what happens. 6 years later, July 1991. They are going to close the camp. Everyone will have to leave. That's impossible. Where will we go? That's what they're saying. Not just this camp, all of them. The rumors skittered around the camp. Everyone was uneasy, and as the days went by, the uneasiness grew into fear. Salva was almost 17 years old now, a young man. He tried to learn what he could about the rumors by talking to the aid workers in the camp. They told him that the Ethiopian government was near collapse. The refugee camps were run by foreign aid groups, but it was the government that permitted them to operate. If the government fell, what would the new rulers do about the camps? When that question was answered, no one was ready. One rainy morning, as Salva walked toward the school tent, long lines of trucks were arriving. Masses of armed soldiers poured out of the trucks and ordered everyone to leave. The orders were not just to leave the camp, but to leave Ethiopia. Immediately there was chaos. It was as if the people ceased to be people and instead became an enormous herd of panicked, stampeding, two-legged creatures. Salva was caught up in the surge. His feet barely touched the ground as he was swept along by the crowd of thousands of people running and screaming. The rain, which was falling in torrents, added to the uproar. The soldiers fired their guns into the air and chased the people away from the camp. But once they were beyond the area surrounding the camp, the soldiers continued to drive them onward, shouting and shooting. As he dashed ahead, Salva heard snatches of talk. The river. They're chasing us to the river. Salva knew which river they meant, the Gilo River, which was along the border between Ethiopia and Sudan. They are driving us back to Sudan, Salva thought. They will force us to cross the river. It was the rainy season. Swollen by the rains, the Gilo's current would be merciless. The Gilo was well known for something else, too. Crocodiles. So did you catch why they're leaving the camp, why it's closing? Because, he's been there for 6 years. That's a long time. It said that the camp is closing because the government is being overthrown, the government in Ethiopia, and it needs the government to run the federal aid. So, other countries were allowed to come in to help, but the government allowed them to do that. So without that government in place, Salva and all of those refugees are being forced to leave. So this kind of makes you think, what is the purpose of government? I know that, you study government in school, and in sixth grade, we're going to study it in social studies as well. And think about, why do we have governments? What are the outcomes of their actions? I think we've seen a lot of that in our country recently, but also looking at other countries, we can see it. So think about government. The purpose of a government is to provide order, keep order within a society by creating rules. So, if there is no rules, if that government collapses, there's not going to be order. So right now in Salva's situation, that government is forcing everyone to leave in a violent way because there really is no government happening. They were overthrown. So there's no rules, there's no order. And that's why we're seeing that chaos. So it'll be interesting to see how he does on the river and if we see any of those crocodiles. So that is the end of our chapter 12.